Hello, I'm Sarah Woods, Director of the Kentucky Book Festival, a program of Kentucky Humanities. Welcome to the 2020 Kentucky Book Festival online. We're pleased you've taken the time to join us for this special festival that brings together authors, readers, and literary enthusiasts from across the country and the Commonwealth, just like we've done for 39 years. All of our Kentucky Book Festival conversations would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors. Today, the Snowy Owl Foundation and the Tallgrass Foundation are bringing you The Path to Publishing. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this discussion with Courtney Maum, Beverly Bell, and Clint Edwards, in conversation with Literary Agent Alice Speilburg. Alice, I'll turn it over to you.
So we're going to go through a lot of the nitty-gritty details today of what it's like to go from writer in your basement or closet or wherever you might be to a published author on a panel like this. But I thought it might be nice to start with that kind of successful moment in each of these authors' careers. When did it feel real for you? When did you feel like, yeah, I can check that box off on my bucket list. I am now a published author. So if you all could share kind of when that moment was for you and what it felt like.
I need time to think. There were so many times I felt successful and then it fell apart, you know. I don't know. I mean, I was really lucky as a young person. As soon as I learned to read, I wanted to write. I started writing. I've always written. And I was really lucky in that I don't come from a family of readers, but I had wonderful teachers, really amazing teachers growing up who, from a very early age, 8, 9 years old, said to me, that just I had something that I should nurture. So I had kind of a funny experience because I went through high school as like the writer kid, the writer chick. And I started submitting to magazines and contests early and getting publications really at a young age, like 13. And so I kind of came out the gate a little egocentric, like already identifying as a writer. And so it wasn't until my 20s when I started having major failures, that I was cut down. So I don't know, all throughout my career, I mean, I think that's sort of the nature of writing, especially for those of us who want a book, when it finally happens. I mean, that's sort of why I wrote this book before and after the book deal, because we are in a culture in America where I think are trained, if you have a writing talent, you're either going to get an MFA or not, but I think most of us do want to have a published book, but then we get the book and then we don't know what star to shoot for anymore. What does success mean when you've already published? What does it feel like? So something I've personally come back to is just that when I'm able to let writing feel magical again and not think about whether I'm currently working on something that's going to be published or not, but just like I'm almost writing for myself just from sheer joy. Right now, I'm this point in my career, that to me feels like my, huge success. What about everybody else?
It's interesting, I think that there are so many pieces. It's not necessarily when you hold the book in your hand or when you sign the contract or when it might be, one person saying, I read your book and it changed my life, or it resonated with me, or I love that line. And those are the moments.
That's such an important yeah.
So sorry, I was gonna say, the moment for me was when I finally impressed my mother, which is a tough sale. So when I told her that I wanted to study English, she asked me what I was going to do with that, and I told her I was going to be homeless because that's what she wanted to hear. And then she, when I started publishing in, was I think one of the first like known publications I was in was the Huffington Post, and she's like, I've never heard of it. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I was publishing in the Washington Post, and she's like, okay, well, what is that? And then I was in the New York Times, and she says, oh, I've heard of that. And then she said, can I pick it up? Where can I buy it? And I said, well, it's going to be online. She said, oh, it wasn't good enough for print, And so I have a very mixed relationship with my mother. But when I finally actually published a book and it was in a bookstore and she went and sent me a selfie of her next to it and buying it, that was like a big deal for me. Trying to, I guess legitimize myself over the past several years. It felt good to finally show my mother that I had done something. So.
You showed your mom.
Yeah, I showed my mom.
That resonates with me because the first time I was in the New York Times, my mother called me. She said, well, how'd you get that? You have friends there? Anyway, we won't make this a...
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have brought up our mothers. Beverly, how'd you do? What was your...
Yeah, I'm going to tell a totally different story. So speaking of mothers, a couple of things. So I don't come from a family of readers or writers. So I didn't have that frame of reference, but I had always written. And when I was 13, my mother said, well, I don't know what you're going to do with your life, but I know that writing is going to be a big part of it. And I think that, she didn't read a lot, she read the newspaper, of course, but, books and wasn't aware of any, writing or anything. But I think that was, some pretty important validation. And that's really what it's about, right? Whether it's from your mom or teachers, it keeps you moving forward. My path to publishing has been a very recent experience from a book perspective. So all of this is, very, very new to me, but it was really what's going on up here, because I always considered myself a writer. I mean, that's what I was, that's what I did. So I think it's, for me, it was just because my path wasn't typical or, predictable or kind of the assigned way that you're supposed to come to book publishing. I just think for me, it was about, reaching a calm center about, what I was thinking and just kind of grounded in what, I was trying to achieve. So, when it felt real to me, it's felt real to me over many steps, over many different things, so.
Let's talk about that for a minute, that assigned kind of pathway, that kind of understood method of getting published. I think there is this preconceived notion of, to be a published author, you do this, this, and that, and anything outside of that path is somehow not valid. And that is such a myth. There are so many different publishing stories. There are so many different ways to get there. And every day I come across a new one that I didn't know was a path to publishing. So I'm curious kind of what your all's how did your publishing paths start? What kind of writing training did you have, if any? And also kind of whether you feel that helped you in the end, whether you know other writers who have had totally different paths.
I love this question because I consider myself an outsider. I'm speaking to you from Connecticut. I live on the East Coast, and I will definitely say, I'm quite close to New York. I'm about 3 hours from New York City, and the large majority of my colleagues and friends have MFAs. And when I was not necessarily coming up as a writer, but when I was in college, I did go to college, but I majored in comparative literature and translation. I worked a lot on translation. I did not even, the MFA was not on my register. It really wasn't. I just sort of considered, like I mentioned earlier, I always had written, but once I got to college, I started working at like newspapers and magazines and then as a copywriter. So I just always assumed that if you're flexing that muscle in one way or another, whether it's you're writing press releases or you're translating, you're a writer. I did not realize that there was a massive cohort of people going to an MFA. So my path was, I always wrote, I always read, and then in my 20s, I started working on a short story that got longer and longer and longer, and it got so long, I realized there were no contests I could submit it to, and I thought, well, maybe it's a novel, and I kept going. And the beautiful thing I think about, for me at least, at that point I was living in Europe. I lived most of my 20s in France. I was translating there and whatnot. And so I was really separate from all this stuff. And so I wasn't scared about the fact that I was writing a novel. It didn't scare me. And then I knew enough that I needed an agent, and I got the Writer's Digest, and I did everything in kind of a naive, innocent manner. I got an agent that way at a great agency. 2 weeks later, we had an offer from Doubleday, or we had interest from a major publisher. And so I just thought, okay, well, this is how you do it. You work hard, you get the book deal. Well, then I was 24, everything just fell apart. I revised the book with the editor for months and months. Didn't realize that I hadn't signed a contract because I didn't know that we were supposed to have a contract. She was calling me on my cell phone in Paris, and I thought, well, that's serious because it's a long distance call. And she ended up changing her mind, quitting her job. Very long story short, that book did not come out for another 10 years. And so it wasn't until that book fails that I realized what I was lacking from not having an MFA, which was writer friends, writer contracts, contacts, networking possibilities. So those things I built up in my 20s. I ended up I took a job in New York and started attending reading series like crazy. That's when I started going to AWP. I realized that I wasn't going to make it just having an agent. Now, I still think absolutely 100% you can make it. If you consider publishing a book making it, then you absolutely can do it without formal training. But I do not think that you can do it, nor should you, without being a literary citizen. I think it's so important for writers to read, to go to their local bookshops, to know their local librarians, to take part in the conversations around writing. I do find now, and I think this is a kind of a problem with our culture, that people really do think they have a story to tell and they're going to write it and they're going to get a book and they don't need to read anything by anyone else. And that I don't think is true. Whether you have formal education or not, you do need to become part of the community, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Literary citizenship is so important to understanding, where your book fits on the shelves, but also what readers really care about reading, what you care about reading, and whether you're contributing to that or not.
So my story is a little less conventional. I think it kind of sucked, to be perfectly honest. And so if you're like knee deep in the suckage, I'm with you. I hear you. I did do an MFA. I finished it in 2012, and I was just getting close to 30 when I finally, finished my MFA. And I published in a handful of like literary journals, and I've been listed as notable in Best American. I thought, man, I'm going to turn this master's thesis of essays. I published like half of them into a memoir about my father's drug addiction, and I'm gonna turn that into an agent. And it's gonna work. And I was rejected by like 200 agents. I think I was rejected by all the agents. I had a whole spreadsheet of shame, and I got really depressed, so I was a depressed writer, which I think is normal. And then and so I thought I got to do something different. And so I had this old blog that I had created in my undergrad. They just kind of been sitting there collecting dust. And I was a stay-at-home dad for like a summer. And I thought, I'm gonna write about my kids and just put it on this blog and see what happens. And 1,000 people read this short essay that I had written. And the last place I'd been published, I think, was North Dakota Quarterly, and the circulation was 300. And I'm pretty sure that I and the managing editor actually read it. So I don't know who actually read that article. And so I was like, wow, 1,000 people, and my head exploded. And so I wrote on that thing, I said, I'm going to publish on this thing 5 days a week for a year. And by the end of that year, I got an attention from the Huffington Post. I wrote an article there, which then led to the Washington Post and the New York Times. And then there was at one point, I thought, I had a decent following online. I think I had like 10,000 followers or something. And I thought, I'm gonna try writing a parenting book. So I started querying agents and publishers again. And I don't know how many, probably another 200 agents rejected me. And so I'm like this, and there was one point where I wrote an article for the Washington Post, and it was the most read article online. And like Good Morning America came to my house and like drove me around, which was absolutely terrible. And I don't recommend that to anyone. They were at my house for like 8 hours, and I was on the show for maybe 4 minutes. But I was going back and forth with this agent. I said, hey, I was on Good Morning America today. I got this stuff going on. Imagine what I could do with your help. And then she emailed me and said, I just don't see this working out. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm done with traditional publishing. So I did a Kickstarter and raised like 10 grand and published my first book myself and sold it through my website, and it did okay. And I was like done with it. I was like, I'm just going to self-publish another book. And then a friend of mine told me about Page Street, which was this kind of new publisher that was taking unagented series. And they were distributed by Macmillan. It seemed like a big deal, So I was like, all right. So I reached out to them, and they responded and said, yeah, we'd like to have a meeting with you. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So we had a meeting. I was like the president of the press, and then like the editor who ended up being my editor. And they said, we really like your voice and we like your writing. We think you're really funny, but your book idea sucks. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, that was good meeting. Thanks for chatting. And then they said, well, why don't we come up with something else? And so then together we talked, and that's where we came up with my first book that was actually published by them, which is a book of apologies to my wife, which, has done well. And I just finished, and that's, and every step along the way, I've been rejected by, I think, every agent. Alice, you've probably rejected me. You don't even, right? I guarantee if I look on my spreadsheet and search your name, it'll be there, right? And, but I just kept at it. I don't know. I didn't know what else to do. I just love to write. It's how I process the world. And so, the blogging thing just kept going. And now, I'm on my third book, just came out, and, I've got like across platforms, like 500,000 followers or something. And I live in this like middle of nowhere town, and I write at the play place at McDonald's before that was the only place I could write. So listen, if you're watching this and you're like, man, I can't find an agent, or I'm getting rejected, I'm with you, okay? If you want to talk about my rejection, my spreadsheet of shame, we can talk about it. I think it's only just this year I finally signed with an agent. I've signed with Folio, and who knows what's going to happen. They'll probably shut me down here in a little bit. And that's
I love that.
There are so many great ways, so many avenues to publish right now that just keep at it. Write every day, keep at it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, even if you're talking about agents, I think there are a lot of misconceptions there too. There's the sense that like you can't get published without an agent, or you need like some sort of solid publishing resume to get an agent in the first place, or that once you sign an agent, that's it, you're gold, you're definitely going to get published now. And even that isn't true. So I think, full disclosure, I am Beverly Bell's agent. So our story, like all stories, had lots of twists and turns in publishing. And I fell in love with Beverly's book. I fell in love with the structure of it, with the prose. I fell in love with this story of this woman who was murdered in the Lexington Country Club. It was this huge national story, and she was this famous golfer, and then everyone forgot about it. And so I loved it, but I also knew we had this balance between like, is this book fiction or nonfiction? And that was always the struggle with it from a market point of view. So publishing is this weird place where it is a marketplace, it is a business, but it's the people in it are in it for love of words and books and stories. And so these things come up to head a lot, and agents might fall for a book, but then not be able to sell it. in the end, we did find a place to sell it. But I think it's fair to say that Beverly probably could have, I know she could have submitted to the University Press of Kentucky without me. She probably could have gotten that deal without me. And agents have, a lot of things that they do before and after the book deal. There's more than just getting the deal that an agent can offer you. I hope. I don't know, Beverly. What do you think?
No. Absolutely. It found a home. It found a home that kind of made sense, for the story. Listening to Clint and Courtney talk about their backgrounds, it made me think of some of the things that I've done as a writer. And, like I did basically everything. You name it, and I wrote it. I wrote for radio. I wrote back in the day for, big video scripts. I did magazine pieces. I mean, just anything that you can think of, I did it. And it always just felt like sort of a mishmash for anybody who might be watching it and like, again, feeling like that they don't fit in that box. It did. It felt like this mishmash that didn't make any sense. And I don't know when it was, but a light went off in my head because I had done so many interviews with people, in some of them in very difficult circumstances. And one of the things that I picked up was how different people speak, how they express themselves, the words they choose. And it was just such a big lesson for me, that I had accumulated over the years and really, didn't know that ultimately I would be using it. But the point is that when you're going down that writing path, you're picking up all kinds of things, and you just have to be aware enough to know that you're building your skills. You need to be aware enough to recall them and use them for whatever project that you're working on. I worked at one point. I worked for an oil company, and I was going out to a site to do a story on an industrial use of oil. I'm just going to keep it kind of, not too specific. And, I remember that when I got back and I started putting the story together, I did it in a way that was very different from their other pieces. And this other writer who was on staff there, she's like, how did you come up with that? How did you do that? And I was just like, well, I don't know. I just read other things and incorporated these aspects. The point is that you can always learn. You can always apply what you learn, and it can make a better story. Honestly, I think of all those interviews that I did with people over the years, I think it definitely played a role in my book that Alice has talked about. Some of the pieces I did were very difficult. They were very sad circumstances, people confronted with great tragedy, and those pieces were not fun to do. But years later, when I was writing this book, I was just able to access that and access, some of that expression of real human emotion. Hopefully it works.
So I guess one question I have is how do you know when you're ready to kind of do the book project? And so there was, I think becoming that published author takes a lot of determination. It takes persistence. But one line I really liked from Courtney's book was she wrote, the difference between a published writer and an unpublished one might be their ability to revise, which sounded so true to me.
So what's the question? How do we know when we have a book, like?
Yeah, how do you know you're ready? How do you know whether publishing is quite ready for you or not? How do you know that you're ready to be that published author?
Do you ever know? I mean, gosh, you can look at it both ways, because sometimes you think you're ready and then the market forces say, no, like in Clint's example, it sounds to me like he was super ready. And then for whatever reason, 200 people didn't see his potential. I mean, just from a very like pragmatic and boring point of view, I find now I have 4 published books, 1 forthcoming. And then I would say, I haven't stopped to count them recently, but I have to have at least like 8 full-length book-length manuscripts that I really believed in that are just shelves, right? I have a lot of failed projects, failed stories behind me. And one thing that I keep finding in my, what feels like they're gonna be book-length manuscripts maybe, is that if I can get to 10,000 words and I wanna keep going, that's a good sign. And if I can get to 30,000 words, then I probably have a book. That doesn't mean it's going to be published. Now, if you're not someone who thinks in terms of word count, you're kind of typical commercial novel. I would say novel is like 90,000 words or something. So that's a big chunk, right? But so for me, whether you're ready, for me is about to start with about momentum of the prose itself, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. Do you have enough of a plot, some level of conflict that can carry the momentum of a book-length manuscript, through the book? And then when it comes time to try to get that thing out in the world and discover whether or not you're ready, I think it's all about stamina. I mean, the big thing that I keep coming back to in this industry is that the people with like faith, like emotional faith, psychological faith, and stamina are the ones that just keep publishing. And I've seen so many friends of mine broken by, they had expectations for their first book that didn't come to pass, and they did not have the stamina to write another book, disregarding what had happened to the first. And that is a skill set. I don't know if it's learned or it's just hard won or what, but you really do have to learn in this business that it's not always your first book that leads people to your work. It's your third, it's your fourth, it's your fifth, and you just have to keep going. So, I think like Clint's a great example of perseverance, right? Like no one could stop him. No one could stop him. He just kept going. And he, in a certain sense, I've self-published too, and I'm a big advocate of self-publishing, because there is a time and a place for that, and there comes a time when the gatekeepers are wrong. That happens.
Alice, I still don't feel like I'm ready. I don't feel like I'm there. I don't feel like I never have felt like. That's such a hard question, because when I met with his name is John, I think it's Remringer. I think I'm messing up his last name, but won a Minnesota Book Award or whatever, and he came to my grad program and he was telling us about writing. And he held up this calendar, right? And he had little stars on it. And every star represented an hour that he wrote that day. And he would give himself a star for every hour. And he had a whole box of these, like years of these calendars. And he would say, I usually try to do 2 hours a day, but then you go, there'd be months where there were no stars. He's like, that was a bad month, And he said, you should, at the bare minimum, I would recommend everybody write 2 hours a day. And I remember thinking to myself, I just dragged my family, half the state so I could get a graduate degree. I had 2 kids. And I wasn't writing 2 hours a day, and that wasn't even a part-time job. And that was the moment that I said, I'm going to start writing every day for 2 hours. And I've done that ever since. So it's been, 12, 13 years that I've written, and more than that now. I write way more than 2 hours a day, but I said, that's my bar. I've got to at least do that. I would get up at 5:30 in the morning before the kids were up, although they just kept getting up earlier. But I would get up and I would write, and that's still what I do. And I found weird places to write, like I said, the McDonald's play place, because they had internet and they had soda fountains, so I could get jacked up on Diet Coke and write for a couple hours. And that, like, if writing has to be like a lifestyle, I mean, some people can do it. Some people just sit down and in 3 months they've given birth to a book and it's like a literary genius. I was not that way. I've had to sit there and just slog through it and just write and write and write every day and think and write. And that's the only way I've ever been able to accomplish anything. That and just being obviously incredibly stubborn.
Yeah. So you say this, and we're right in the middle of NaNoWriMo when thousands of writers are trying to chug out a novel in the month of November. And I am curious, the stars was an interesting technique to me. I've never heard that one before. But how, Beverly and Courtney, how do you guys motivate yourself to write? Because obviously you can't submit anything until you've actually written it.
Well, you can do a book proposal sometime if you have enough of a platform, right? But I guess that counts as submitting it.
You have to write a good.
You have to write a lot, right?
Yeah, book proposals aren't like, they kind of suck. I'll be
They
honest.
take a long time.
They're not awesome. It's like, oh yeah, I'm only gonna have to write 30 pages or 60 pages or whatever. No, it's no fun.
That's a good question. Beverly, how do you motivate?
Well, it's kind of like what Clint says, it's a choice. It's a decision. For my book, I was in a full-time job that had nothing to do with writing, and I just decided that I was going to do this. It was a pretty demanding job, and so I got up every day between 4 and 4:30 and wrote a couple of hours before I had to get ready for my real job. And I did that for 3.5 years. And, it just has to be the priority. The other thing is, so I don't know, maybe I'm alone in this, but, I'm frequently trying to find excuses for not wanting to maybe do it.
Well, writers are the best at not writing. That's like the thing that they try to do.
Excuses. And then I always have the moment of reckoning, when the best line that I heard about writing was from Jane Smiley. She wrote 1,000 Acres, and she said, she was in this group I was attending, and she said, somebody said, how, what do you say to writers to get them to motivate them, to write? And she said, apply butt to chair. I just thought that was so funny. But so we do that. We go in and we do it. And every single time, I do that, I feel better. And it's like, why is this so difficult for me to just go, okay, I need to do this, whether it's what Clint says, it's 2 hours, or by the way, the stars that never thought of that one. Used that years ago when I was potty training my daughter, but never thought of it in this regard. But we feel better, right? When we write. And I just, when we have written, maybe is the better way to say it. Because I don't know, but it just kind of drives me crazy when I don't. Like it's just like it just gnaws at me. So
yeah, for me, I'm a little bit different. I see most of my life as like, how can I put this in a way that doesn't like offend my lovely family? All I want to do is write. Like I love to write. My high school English teacher used to tell me I had diarrhea of the word processor. I'm happiest when I'm writing, but although I'm self-employed, I do a lot of other things, and I can't write, all day long every single day. So, but I'm definitely someone, the minute I get my daughter on the bus, I come back into the house. My husband also works from home. I barely address him. I go straight to my room, you know, and I'm happiest when I'm just disgusting, slovenly, working at the desk, you know, eating at the desk, like getting into it. But the way that I've worked out my schedule for the last couple of years that works out really well for me is to block off Mondays and Tuesdays exclusively for my own work. And then Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays are all the outward facing things. You know, I still work a little bit as a copywriter. I work as a writing coach. I've been doing lots of other stuff. And of course, you just have email and like life upkeep. And so I'm not someone that writes every day, but I write super, super hardcore on Mondays and Tuesdays. And I find that allowing myself to get into that really feral place, front loading the week with that helps me so much. And I've sort of really refined a very strict process of how I write on Mondays and Tuesdays. I try to get into the flow. So if I hit a place where the transition is a little awkward or I've used the wrong word, instead of stopping, I highlight it, or I'll literally write into the text, need to research automobiles from the 1940s here, but I'm not going to do it that day. And then on Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, when I run out of steam and I have, instead of, you know, a straight 4 hours to write, I have maybe 2 and I'm super distracted and I've been on Twitter and the world's on fire. Well, then instead of creating new content, which is challenging and needs a certain part of my brain, I go back into my highlighted doc and I say, okay, today I have the energy to find a better word for that stinky word, which is the lazy word. And today I have the energy to research those automobiles. So I sort of divide and conquer that way. And that helps me because now I've just like, it's almost athletic. I've trained my body on Mondays and Tuesdays to just be ready to write. And then I've also trained my mind and body on the other days to be ready to refine and revise. And then finally, what I would say, if you're not motivated to write or you're making up excuses or something, you might not be writing the right thing. I often find that people become obsessed with the idea of finishing things instead of stopping and asking themselves, is this project still suiting me? Is it still working out? Am I still interested in telling this story? Am I telling the right story? You know, I was listening to a podcast, Danny Shapiro, who has a wonderful podcast called Family Secrets, where she had invited the author of Empty on. And Empty is a memoir about this woman's struggles with varying eating disorders. And she had got a book contract to write a more academic overview of eating disorders. And she was kind of lagging with it and it wasn't really working. Well, why? Because her soul was telling her, you write your own story. And that's what the book ended up becoming, you know? So I would say to people who feel unmotivated to take a time out and revisit what you're doing. Is it the right story that you're telling? Is there not some story inside the story that's trapped and trying to get out? It's okay also to say like, this is failing and move on to something else. I mean, is it okay if the book's under contract? Well, then you have to revisit it, but it is okay to say, yeah, hey, it's not working.
Yeah, I really love that. And I think you're spot on about the idea that, you know, you're writing one book, but maybe there's this other story inside of that is begging to be told instead. And often it takes a lot of courage to tell that story because it's probably hiding for a reason. Mm-hmm. And this was something I thought of when, you know, I was reading Clint's book. And I know, you know, in Beverly's book, she's writing about a woman who existed, who was real. And you're kind of, you know, you're putting these stories out there for the world. And Clint's book in particular, I was reading Fatherish, and he's telling, you know, the worst moments of of being a father, like when he made the worst decisions, when the things that he regretted most, and putting these out there for the world to see. And of course we read them and we're like, oh yeah, I've done that too. But, which worked out well for you. But was there ever that sense, that trepidation, like, what if I'm getting this wrong? What if someone reads this and says, no, that's not how it is. You're a terrible father. Like, there has to be that sense that,
oh, that's going to happen. Yeah, for sure.
But like that sense of writing for you versus writing for an audience.
Well, hey, can I can I jump back to this
Yeah.
just for 1 second with what Courtney was saying about schedule? This is the most practical advice I can give to anyone that wants to write. And this is because I'm married, I got 3 kids, I got a cat and a dog, right? And I've got a full-time job, and I've always worked full-time and written on the side. For a while there, I was writing and teaching, and I had to sit down with my wife and say, I need to write, and this is what I do. And so we're going to talk about how we're going to schedule that writing time and when I can do it. And the mornings is what happened. So I would get up in the morning, and my wife, Mel, gets the kids ready. And then I say, I'll get the kids to bed, right? And so every morning I wrote. And then once we established that, I was a jerk about it. Like, I will write, and I'm going to be the biggest jerk about my writing time. This is my writing time. I will leave the house. I will run away. I will do whatever I need to do to make sure that that writing time is mine, and this is when I will do it. And it took me years of establishing that, to the point where it's like, even my kids, oh, Dad's writing, leave him alone, and so it's had to be a huge structural thing, and it's just so practical to say. And then once I established it, I felt guilty not writing. Like, if I've got this time
Absolutely.
and I'm butthead about it, I probably better sit down and make part of it. And then back to your other question, Alice, as far as like putting stuff out there, I know there are a lot of authors that really struggle with that. I don't have a lot of shame, and in so many ways, it's been a huge blessing for me. I've been an oversharer for years, but I will say that you do have to think a lot about your audience and how much you're going to put out and how you're going to phrase things. Because I've gotten to a point now where there are things that I posted online, and suddenly I've just had streams of hate mail. Like, it's insane. So, it's definitely something you have to consider and think about, but I don't think you should worry about that until you're revising. I think you should let it out now. Let it get gritty, let it get dirty, go where it needs to go, and then revise it later.
Yeah. Well, and I also think, the hidden stories are sometimes the best stories. The stories that, people are reluctant to tell are the stories that other people will read and talk about, and it may open their eyes to something they didn't realize before. So sometimes, that courage in a writer to kind of decide to put it on the page and put it out there for people to see can be the thing that makes the book really wonderful. So I wonder if we can talk about like what it was like to actually get an offer, to go from, I wrote a book and now it's on submission. I've been getting a million rejections to that point when someone said yes.
Oh my God, that was an exciting moment. I was super pregnant with my daughter. Like, I think I was 8 months pregnant, and it was the summer, and it was really hot, and we lived above this river, and I'd gone down to the river, and I maybe this is too much information, but I was naked. It was that hot, and super pregnant. And I came back up, and my husband said, your phone is ringing, it's your agent. And we were on submission, so like my agent calling at that point. This was my third agent, I should say. That was a lot. Yeah, anyway. He knew that every time she called, it could be something important. So he threw me a towel, and I'm dripping wet. And she told me, we had offers. And I just remember thinking, this is very funny that I'm getting this call like naked, because I do feel like I'm going to be reborn. It was just such a process. That was the same book that had earned a publisher 10 years before, and the whole thing had fallen apart, and it had really broken my heart and also pushed me into a depression. And it really was kind of a phoenix rising type story. It was a book I did not want to resuscitate, and my agent forced me to. And the offers were consequential. They were going to change my life. I was really, struggling financially at that point. And I just had this feeling like, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but like, this is a before and after type point, and I'm going to be able to do it now, like write in the way that I always wanted to. Now that moment I look back at, and it's very tender and wonderful in my heart, but my I have since published like twice with the big five, and now I've also published with the indies. So financially, you know, it didn't always go up, up, up. But you know, that is just it was a wonderful moment. It's like the thing I'd wanted for years and years. You know, one of the happiest moments of my life, for sure.
Mhm. Beverly? Clint?
Yeah, it's kind of a duo thing that I kind of link these two things together. I was doing a girls trip with 4 of my friends from high school, and we were at a lovely place. It's called the Greenbrier in West Virginia, and one of our friends had gotten a special deal. But just before I left on that trip, Alice, you had agreed to be my agent. And so my friends were just so excited. And of course I was excited too. And they're just like, you know, they're just ready to, you know, jump in and help or whatever, you know, lifelong friends. So that was kind of part one. And then of course the part two was the offer from the publisher. And you know, all I can say is that after going the long and winding road, it was just a real peaceful spot for me. It was just, I don't know. It was just, okay, you did it. And you have to understand that with my book, I have been so absorbed in this tale for so long that it really, and I mean this 100%, so much of it was getting her story out. The story of this young, unbelievably talented golfer, and she's just murdered when she's 27, you know, and it was just, you know, there was just so much, it was so unfair. And so I was really compelled about getting her story out. So I think a lot of that was just like, okay, we're taking this step. We're going to bring her out in the world again. And everything that was stolen from her when she was 27, maybe we can give some of that back.
I kind of had a moment, like it wasn't, I mean, it was, you know, I met with the publishers and we came up with this idea for a book. And that was when they started talking about money, but, you know, they wanted to see some more writing in the theme and different stuff. And it was just kind of this drawn out moment. And the whole time, I guess I was faced with this kind of transition. Do I want to go publishing, or do I want to just kind of keep doing this self-publishing route that I had some success with? And eventually I just decided, well, let's give it a shot. You know, it was one of those moments where I thought to myself, you know, if this doesn't work out, I know what else to do. You know, like I'd already proven years of determination and beat my head up against the rejection. So why not?
Yeah. All right, I'm going to bring Sarah back in. I think she has some questions from the audience for us.
Yeah, thank you, Alice. I have some questions. I've also taken some notes. So a quick recap for people that are listening. Writing is showing up. Be a jerk about it. Clint, that's Clint's advice. Trust McDonald's to write. And of course, you know, many other amazing insights. Get Courtney's book. It really is a fantastic reference point. So a few questions have come in. I do want to ask first, how do each of the authors deal with rejection? Clint, I think the spreadsheet of shame, you're treating it kind of with an air of humor, which you do in your books anyway. They're hilarious. But how do people not learn to not take it personally? A lot of authors ask, or writers ask that. So Who wants to jump in there?
Well, I would say rejections for the unpublished writer. You have not yet published where you want to, if it's a book that you're trying to publish, you don't have the book yet. It won't feel that way in the beginning, but your rejections, especially if you're trying to submit to magazines and to literary magazines, so shorter stories or essays, your rejections at that stage in your early career are guideposts toward what your real authentic voice is usually. So for instance, for me, I went through a really dreadful period early on where I was trying to write short stories because I thought that's kind of what you had to do. And I was trying to imitate Raymond Carver because I thought that was the only way to get published. And my stories were all these sad things about a man reminiscing on a couch, and the only action was him going to the fridge and getting like a lukewarm beer, and it was just not good. And they kept getting rejected. And little by little, I started incorporating humor into my work, lots of humor and kind of quirky points of views. I started writing from the point of view of inanimate objects and having fun, because I thought, well, heck, I'm never getting published, so screw it, I might as well have fun. And that's when I was still getting rejected, but I started to get personalized rejections, and they started saying things like, we love this, but we just published a piece that was written from the point of view of whatever, a can of soup. And I started to get better, and the rejection started to guide me, and then once you do start getting published, honestly, the rejections, they never stop. They start to feel more personal. So you just have to kind of be proud of your work, be immersed in something new that you're working on, and believe you're going to get it right, and just let that stuff roll off your shoulders, because everyone else is getting rejected. The more that you published, you're still going to get rejected. It is a part of our business. And you need to learn to deal with it the way that we deal with, traffic or anything else that's a nuisance in our lives.
Thank you, Courtney. Does anyone else want to jump in, Clint or Beverly?
Guys, just let it suck. Just let it suck. Just take the suckage and you hold it and you hug it. I still get rejected. I have to have rejections in the hundreds of thousands by now, between publications, magazines, literary journals. And there was a time, that I really had a hard time with it, and it can spin you into a spiral of depression. But now that I'm, published a few books, I've had some success, I look back on those moments when I almost quit and just say to myself, I'm glad I didn't. So guys, just let it suck. It's cool. We're all getting rejected. Everybody on this panel is getting rejected. Rejections are everywhere. I could probably wallpaper this whole room with rejection. So just let it suck. It's cool.
Okay, I'm going to disagree just a little bit there. I am definitely not hugging any rejections, okay? I am spitting on them. I am throwing them across the room. But it comes back, I've said this to my kids as they were growing up. I would just say, when something bad happens, just feel bad about it until you don't feel bad anymore. Don't ignore it, or because I will agree with both of them. It sucks. It kind of claws its way into your own confidence, and you're like, what am I doing this for? I just always think it comes back to the belief in whatever it is you're writing. I've said that 1,000 times, just, do I believe in this thing? Yeah, I do. Or, well, maybe not, maybe it's time to move on to something else. But we've got to allow ourselves to feel bad, because it doesn't feel good, but it's only in the feeling bad that you move on. So.
Thank you for those answers. I have one question for our moderator, but the authors can jump in on this too. I promised that we'd go over query letters in some form or fashion here, and I know this probably won't be I don't know how quickly we can go through it, Alice, but what are some of the most important elements in a query letter for those that are working on query letters, or some people listening might not even know what I'm talking about, but could you give us kind of a brief rundown there?
Sure, sure. So a query letter is basically a cover letter. You imagine you apply for a job, you write a cover letter with your job application. So when you're publishing a book, when you're submitting a book to an agent or to an editor at a publishing house, you're writing a query letter with whatever sample pages you're accompanying with it. And the most important pieces of the query letter, for me, I really want to know the answer to 3 questions. Who is your main character? What is the conflict? And then the last question is why, which really comes down to the stakes. Why does this character have to engage in this conflict? What is at stake? My quick answer.
Yeah, thank you.
I think there's another why too. I have this like side hustle called the query doula, where I help writers with their query letters, because I'm sure Alice can probably attest to the fact that there's a lot of incredible writers out there who write very poorly about their own work. And something I find, I mean, obviously I'm not an agent, but for my book, before and after the book deal, I spent, years interviewing lots of different publishing professionals, and an answer that I think is becoming more and more important as we start to, we're entering a realm where the author becomes like a brand, right? Why did you, the author, take all this time to write this book? And that question seems to be left unanswered a lot. And it's such an interesting question. Many of us take, you have 2 people on the panel, they're getting up before dawn, making all these sacrifices. We're locking ourselves away in rooms when we could be doing all these other things. We could be earning money in a more traditional fashion, and we feel called to make up stories, right? It's kind of weird, but why? I worked with one woman who, her query letter, was fine. It sort of, we saw what the main conflict was and everything was there, but she was a woman from the Midwest, and the entire book was about the confiscation of sailing vessels and boats from Italian immigrants during World War II on the West Coast, off of Seattle and Oregon. And there was nothing in there about why she'd written the book. And we were talking on the phone, and I said, can you talk to me a little bit about, why you wrote this book, why you took, as a landlocked person, you took all this time to research, sailing vessels and whatnot. And she said, oh, well, now that I think about it, growing up, boating, these sort of traditional fishing trips I do with my dad, like those were our most important times together. And we kind of built a relationship up over boating. And I thought, you know what, let's get that in the query letter, because again, I don't want to speak for agents, but just being on the author end, I do find that, good agents want to see beyond the book that we're trying to attach to the query letter, to not just the books that we'll write next, but the off the book pieces and the personal essays and the op-eds and the places that we're going to stake our claim and the things that we're going to talk about. So I do think that there's room in the query letter, not a lot, like a sentence or 2, right before your bio, but to get in there, why the heck you birthed this project,
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I would actually say that when it comes to the bio section at the bottom, I'm much more interested in the inspiration for a book than which awards you've won.
Well, thank you all for those answers, and that's a really important piece, the query letter, that sometimes gets looked over. So I really appreciate your feedback on that. I want to thank the authors and Alice for being here. Thank you to Courtney, Beverly, and Clint, and Alice for your insights. And thanks to our sponsors, the Snowy Owl Foundation and the Tallgrass Foundation, for making this talk possible. We also want to thank you for joining us for this 2020 Kentucky Book Festival online event. I want to tell you briefly about a special offer that Courtney Maum's publisher, Catapult, is offering right now for her book Before and After the Book Deal. And like I said, it really is a primer on everything you want to know about getting published. And she includes, should you get an MFA? She answers a lot of questions that people are always asking. So if you're an agent and an editor and you want to gift this book for Christmas, there's a 35% off deal by using the promo code #WriterLove. Kentucky Humanities will post that and the link and information to get the book on our social media channels shortly and on our website. So just keep an eye out for that. If you're interested in purchasing Clint's book or Beverly's book or one of the books discussed today, please visit our independent bookstore partner, Joseph Beth Booksellers at josephbeth.com, where you can find all those books. For a complete schedule of Kentucky Book Festival conversations, visit kyhumanities.org. Follow us on social media at kyhumanities. For Kentucky Humanities, I'm Sarah Woods.